everyone. Welcome to the education series brought to you by the Office of Undergraduate Research. The topic today is Conflict of Interest 101, and our speaker today is Bryant Gordon. Just as a reminder, this is a virtual event. It is being recorded. Please mute yourself and turn off your camera to ensure an optimal experience. If you have questions, use the chat feature or unmute when invited by the speaker. Here is the event evaluation form. As a reminder, UROPS scholars, you are required to fill out this form in order to receive credit for attending the events. And this eval QR code will also be available at the end of the event as well. The mission of the University of Utah Office of Undergraduate Research is to facilitate and promote undergraduate student-faculty collaborative research and creative works in all disciplines throughout the University of Utah campus. In recognition that excellence requires diversity, we pursue this mission through equitable programming that promotes diverse representation and social justice. We acknowledge that this land is named for the Ute tribe, which is named for the Ute tribe, is the traditional and ancestral homeland of the Shoshone, Paiute, Goshute, and Ute tribes. The University of Utah recognizes and respects the enduring relationship that exists between many Indigenous peoples and their traditional homelands. We respect the sovereign relationship between tribes, states, and the federal government, and we affirm the University of Utah's commitment to a partnership with Native nations and urban Indian communities through research, education, and community outreach activities. Today's speaker is Bryant Gordon, Compliance Program Manager, the Conflict of Interest Office.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Bryant Gordon. I am the Compliance Program Manager for the Conflict of Interest Office here at the University of Utah. I have been with the University of Utah since 2008. I have been involved in research that entire time. I started off in specimen processing, so I was actually the person who was collecting and processing specimens from our research patients in clinical trials at the Huntsman Cancer Institute. And I've worked in several other roles throughout the University of Utah in different departments. And I've been with the Conflict of Interest Office for about 6 years now. We just wanted to introduce conflict of interest to you, go over what conflicts of interest are, what our role at the university is, and then do some, we're also going to present some case studies on the importance of conflict of interest review and making sure that we are identifying those and managing them when they need to be. Great. So let's define and identify financial conflicts of interest in research. So conflicts of interest arise when an employee of a research facility has what we refer to as a second degree interest with an outside entity. So all University of Utah employees who are involved in research, scholarly educational activities, have a first degree interest from the University of Utah. So that is their role as a university employee and a university researcher. Second degree interests exist when these researchers or these university employees have another interest that is external to the University of Utah. So these would be non-University of Utah entities that they have these relationships with. This could be something like employment or consulting or speaking or advisory boards, anything that would generate money or equity interest for that individual is what we consider to be these interests. These secondary interests have the potential for creating bias for their university roles. So the research or the scholarly educational activities that they're doing here at the University of Utah, or the purchasing. The purpose of the COI office and COI policy is to catch those potential biases and manage them so that the science and the work that's being done here at the University of Utah is as clean and has the least amount of bias possible. These are individual conflict of interest reviews that we're doing here. So we're speaking about specific individuals. However, the institution itself can have conflicts of interest as well, which we refer to as institutional conflicts of interest. So the University of Utah is taking part in human subjects research. So this could be anything from psychological research to actual pharmaceutical research. So it's our responsibility to make sure that these are protected. The university could also have relationships with external entities, such as pharmaceutical companies, startups, or our senior personnel who are the leads of our departments, our department leads, our chairs, presidents, that kind of stuff, or vice presidents, that kind of stuff. And equity interest, or I'm sorry, intellectual property ownership is also considered a potential conflict of interest. So these relationships also have the potential for biasing research that is done at the University of Utah. So our policies and our office are here to make sure that we reduce that bias as much as possible. So what is a conflict of interest? So a conflict of interest, according to university policy, is a financial conflict of interest, is a financial relationship with an external entity, and that may cause a potential for influencing, biasing the design, conduct, or reporting of research. These come in two major forms, which is a relationship with external entities. So this could be in a remuneration, which means you're getting paid for a relationship with them, which could be consulting or an actual employment with them, or having equity interest in that company. So this would be stock in that company. And then the second form would be intellectual property. So intellectual property in this case is a drug that we have created, or a device that we have created, things like that. So that can be a conflict of interest if you're doing research on your own intellectual property. So what are the origins of conflict of interest as an organized office at universities? So in the 1950s, there was a lot of scientific evidence coming out that tobacco was directly linked and caused lung cancer. Because of this information coming out, the tobacco industry actually hired researchers who were skeptical about the science that was coming out with the cancer to serve on scientific boards. And they also sponsored external research, their own research, to prove that smoking did not cause cancer. There's pretty big conflicts involved in this situation. It was a conflict of interest for them to be doing this. And as a result, it took almost 5 decades for the consensus of tobacco causing lung cancer to be to be accepted as a general truth in medicine. This model has also been used in different industries, pharmaceutical companies, agriculture, energy. There was a big one with the sugar, with refined sugar, that used very similar methods as tobacco to dilute the proof that was coming out about the negative effects of their products. So just an example here for a industry-related conflict of interest. This gentleman by the name of Dan Markinson. Dan Markinson was enrolled in a sponsored study, a study sponsored by a pharmaceutical company named AstraZeneca. to study the effects of Seroquel on schizophrenia. And while Dan was on this study, unfortunately, he died because of some of the circumstances that happened with this study. Because of the death, there was an investigation into this research, and a number of different misconduct items were found. Those included coercion on enrollment. So this means that the individual may not have had full consent in joining this study. The subject was improperly enrolled. When you're enrolling into a clinical trial, there is a list of inclusion and exclusion criteria, and these are things that are specific criteria that you are looking for. Those would be the inclusion criteria, and the exclusion criteria are specific things that are not allowed. And these could be things like there's an allergy to a portion of a chemical that is in the drug, or it could be social impacts, or pregnancy is usually one of them. So when they were enrolling this individual, he did not meet the inclusion exclusion criteria, but was added to the protocol anyway. The individual was currently in a psychological hospital and was not fully competent to consent. There may have been some data manipulation, and there was a failure to disclose the conflict of interest to the subject, where this is the big part for us. So what was the conflict of interest? So several members of the research team, including the principal investigator, so this is the person who brought this study to the university and was responsible for running it, had a significant interest in AstraZeneca. Now, this wouldn't necessarily be something that we wouldn't allow at the University of Utah, but we would make sure that there were extra protections for the participants of the trial, as well as anyone who's serving as a part of the research team. So as you can see, there was a large amount of conflict of interest in this specific study. Even to the point where the Institutional Review Board, who's the ethics committee who makes sure that all of the clinical trials coming through the university are fit with the ethical standards of the university and policy and federal regulations, that individual also had a conflict of interest with this study. And with this individual dying on the study, we can see that conflicts of interest can have a huge impact. So our University of Utah individual financial conflict of interest policy, which is 1-006, covers these different kinds of financial conflicts. So which individual conflicts of interest can we identify that are covered under that policy? So the principal investigator had a significant financial interest. So this means that it's over a certain threshold point, but we'll go over in a little bit, from the study sponsor, from consulting, and he was also conducting this research at the university. The co-investigator also had a significant financial interest and was helping conduct it. In addition to the individual conflicts of interest, there were also some institutional conflicts of interest that were involved in this. And what are those? So the department chair had a significant financial interest in the company and was overseeing the full department that this research was being done for. That would be considered a institutional conflict of interest. And as I said earlier, the IRB chair and the COI committee members also had a financial interest with the company as well, with AstraZeneca as well. Some other potentials that aren't covered under university policy. The PI of the study was also the patient's physician. There could have been some impact on the decision to join the study based on the idea of they may not receive the same amount of care if they say, I don't want to do this. The company also compensated the study team for their participant enrollment. So there was a financial gain to be made by enrolling participants on the study. So that has the potential to have people who should not be enrolled on the study being enrolled on the study. So the second category of conflicts of interest that we focus on is intellectual property. So in 1980, the Bayh-Dole Act facilitated the commercialization of technology created at institutions. What this means is that it gave money and support to educational institutions to create new intellectual property. And they shifted the ownership of that from the funding agency. So this could have been the National Institute of Health, NASA, the National Science Foundation, something like this. It moved the ownership of that intellectual property from those funding groups to the institution itself. And because there was this change, institutions were required to create what are called the tech transfer offices to facilitate the creation and licensing of intellectual property. Here at the University of Utah, that office is called the Pivot Center. You may have heard of them before. And then royalties and licensing were awarded to the institution, the departments, and the inventors themselves. So what's an example of this happening? So in 1999, a young man by the name of Jesse Gelsinger died 4 days after being treated with a de novo gene replacement therapy to treat a rare metabolic disorder. Jesse had a disorder that did not allow his body did not process proteins correctly. They were trying to figure out how to make his body process those better. The University of Pennsylvania had a patented technology that was granted license to de novo with 5% equity. So the intellectual property that was being tested on these participants, with Jesse included, was actually owned by the University of Pennsylvania. And then the PI of the study, so the principal investigator of this study, James Wilson, owned a 30% equity interest in de novo. So there was a lot of interaction between this research team and the University of Pennsylvania and this company, de novo. So again, what individual conflict of interest policy pieces were at risk here? The principal investigator was also the inventor of the study, I apologize, of the intellectual property being evaluated. The PI had equity interest in the company and was also running the study. So institutionally, the university owned the intellectual property, and the university had an interest in the company itself. So just as a summary for this, these two cases, these two very sad cases, demonstrate how if we don't control conflicts of interest, there could be the potential for danger to our human participants in studies. And as we do know that in the COI department that not all of our policies can stop all of these from happening, but we need to make sure that we're doing our best to catch these and managing them before they get to a point where a human being can be injured. So now that we know that conflicts of interest exist and how they exist, do they matter? Do they affect behavior? So there have been several studies that have looked at this exact question, and the results show that, well, first of all, research that's coming out of a company that has a financial interest in that research have a potential and have a tendency to have better outcomes than those studies that are done by a second-hand group or by someone who's testing to make sure that these are actually correct. And they've also found that individuals who are have a relationship with a company are more likely to have an idea of a reciprocal, they have more reciprocity in themselves towards these different industries and these different entities, which has the potential to impact the data and bias the information that is coming out. Additionally, there is some additional data that physicians who are prescribing medications are more likely to prescribe medications for the companies that they have a financial interest in. This doesn't necessarily mean that, that there's some kind of corruption going on in this situation, but if you have a relationship with a company and you know what their drugs do, you're more likely to prescribe those drugs. So in 2010, the federal government reacted to the opioid crisis that was happening by passing the Sunshine Act. So this is, it's formerly known as the Physicians Payment Sunshine Act and Patient Protection and Affordable Care. So what this did was that this created a database, which we'll talk about a little bit later. It's a very cool database where every pharmaceutical company in the United States that makes payments to physicians for consulting or for being on a board, all of that information is available to you. So you can actually go on there and look up your physician and see what pharmaceutical companies have made payments to them. It also led to a change in the public health services, including the National Institute of Health, their policies. It lowered the threshold of significant financial interest from $5,000 to $10,000. So anything over a $5,000 point with us, if an investigator is reporting a significant financial interest of $5,000 or above, that is considered a significant financial interest. These thresholds, these levels change depending on the institution you're at, but anything that's PHS funded has this $5,000 threshold. And then it also placed the responsibility of finding these conflicts and managing them onto the institutions themselves. And this led to an overhaul of COI policy at the University of Utah in 2012. So here at the University of Utah, so let's go over our policies and why we exist. So the Conflict of Interest Department and our committee is made up of 21 different individuals from around the campus. That includes staff and faculty, and many different departments are involved. So it's our responsibility to identify and manage financial conflicts of interest that are related to research. And we are also beginning to reach out into scholarly and educational activities as well. So this is to ensure compliance with government agencies, policies of government agencies, but really what it is for is to protect our researchers, the university, our participants, and just the community in general. We want to make sure that we are reducing bias as much as possible. So the University of Utah, every staff and faculty member at a manager level or above is required to file a financial disclosure at least once a year. So this way, we have a record of the financial interests, and we are able to review those. So what is required to be reported? So we require any relationship that reasonably appears related to their responsibility at the University of Utah. So this is anything from external employment and consulting, ownership, equity, paid or unpaid leadership positions with business entities, and any licensing or commercialization of intellectual property. We don't require them to report compensation from the University of Utah or investment vehicles that they don't directly control. So this is if you have a retirement account, we don't require the reporting of that retirement account. And any funding or compensation that is paid to the University of Utah. Sometimes companies, instead of paying a consulting fee to an individual, they will pay that to the university in salary support or support for their department. We are currently revising some of our policies. There were some new federal guidelines that came out. The Department of Energy released an update, and then the Biden administration wants to put a call out to standardize the requirements across the different federal funding agencies. The National Science Foundation updated their policies at the beginning of the year to include venture capitalists. So if you have a startup, we're actually now requiring individuals who have startups that they have interest in or they're working on a study with to report who their venture capitalists are. That way that we have an idea of whether or not, there's the funding that's coming through may have a financial conflict that could manipulate the outcomes as well. So how do we actually process these? How do we review these? So every single project that is done, whether it is human subjects or it is a project that is done through the Office of Sponsored Projects. So this would be like, let's say that there is a company that is funding an engineering research at the University of Utah that doesn't involve human subjects. The Office of Sponsored Projects would be the one that would contact us about that. Our systems are automated, so any human subject studies that are put through the IRB automatically come up to be reviewed for us, and all of the OSP projects also go through the same portal. So we take that information that we get from the Institutional Review Board and from the Office of Sponsored Projects, and we compare that to an individual's financial disclosure. If we see that there's anything that is looks like it could be connected or is directly connected, like they are a physician and they're running a Pfizer study and they have equity interest in Pfizer, that is brought to the Conflict of Interest Committee, and they review that and decide whether or not one of these three outcomes would need to, or they decide between one of these three outcomes: no conflict, manageable conflict, and eliminate the conflict. No conflict and eliminate the conflict very rarely happen. No conflict would, the individual would somehow have to prove to us that their relationship with a company that is funding their research doesn't have the ability to create bias. It's very, very rarely happens. And it usually only happens when it is a nonprofit organization that doesn't have a financial stake in this. Sometimes Planned Parenthood comes up. That's a group that may be no conflict. Manageable conflict, or eliminate the conflict. So this would be us requiring the investigator to either remove their relationship with the company or remove themselves from the research. But most studies are managed. So what does a management plan mean? So when we're managing an investigator, the things that we're looking at are transparency. So making sure that anyone who's taking part in this research, whether that is a part of the research team or a human subject that may be on the study, we may want to make sure that they know that there is the potential for this conflict, or there's a potential for conflict, and that one of the individuals that's working on this study has a financial relationship with a company. Data integrity. So these come in who's collecting the data, who's analyzing the data. If there are multiple people on the study and there's some who can collect this data who do not have a relationship with the company, we will require that the conflicted investigator does not collect that data, but that a non-conflicted member of that study collects it and analyzes it. We also sometimes have peers. So we have an individual who is not conflicted and not involved in the study look over the results and the data that it was collected to make sure that they believe that these were collected correctly without bias. And then there is the human protections portion of this, where the conflicted individual doesn't consent the participant, because there is a possibility for coercion there. And then we make sure that our participants, again, know that that there is a potential conflict in this study. And then there's annual compliance. So they have to fill out a form once a year letting us know. There is this idea of rebuttable presumption. Rebuttable presumption refers to the idea that if someone has more than $10,000 in interest in a study, they should not be allowed to work on that study. So the individual who has the conflict is required to have a compelling circumstance to be able to stay on the study. Compelling circumstance would be something like the individual is the only physician in the world that has the expertise to run this study. So it's a pretty high bar. And usually what would happen is we would have these individuals, again, either remove themselves from the study or remove their financial interest. The Office of Foreign Influence. So there is another office that works directly with us that is specifically works with foreign companies and organizations from foreign countries. That could be anything from Canada to Mexico to the United Kingdom. We treat everybody the same because we want to make sure that everyone is being treated equally. So if you have any questions about foreign influence, that would be, they have their own office. Trent Foxley is their director. Really great people. They're really easy to talk to. So just to go over some, towards the end of this presentation, just to go over some broader context of what, why do we even allow this? Why do we even allow this to happen? So there are limited resources for public resources funding. So the federal funding, it's not as high. There's a reduction in state support, and industry needs access to test subjects. That word's not great for me, but participants is what we would use, human subjects. So we want to make sure that the industry has the ability to come in contact with participants, and that participants also have the opportunity to receive the pharmaceuticals or devices that could have a positive impact on their life. So you can see this is a study that came out in 2015. The federal funding since the beginning of the 2000s has kind of stagnated. They're still giving a certain amount of money, but it hasn't increased very much. But you can see that the corporate or pharmaceutical companies or external companies, that funding keeps increasing. And there's also a struggle for young investigators, young research to get funding. So allowing for more funding in our institution allows for better research. So what are the consequences for having these conflicts? There's public perception of the research that we're doing could be altered because of our relationship with industries. And there's a lot that comes out of it. There have been some negative papers that came out. There have been some research that did seem to have some bias in it. So it's really important that we as a community and we as the university are taking a look at every study that's coming through and making sure we're identifying information, or we're identifying when there is a conflict of interest, so that we can manage that correctly and make it so that we are as unbiased as possible. Here's just kind of a little bit of like example for you of all of the different things that could be happening in an investigator and the different pressures that are happening. And we need to make sure that we're involved with it to support them. So just as a conclusion, conflict of interest policy and processes aim to minimize and reduce and eliminate bias in the design, conduct, and reporting of research. While COI policies help support ethical behaviors, they are limited in their scope and context. We can't be everywhere all at once, and we can only work within our policies. Scientists and researchers may be inherently biased at some level by the evolving environment in academia, requiring individuals to be more aware of their biases, discipline, and contemplation to ensure the best possible research. I'm going to provide these slides so you can come through and look at them. Also, there's these different resources that you can contact with. The AAMC, which is the American Academic Medical Centers, they have a lot of information about implementation of COI policy and COI in general. The Center for Open Science, and I really want to point out this database for industry payments on physicians. This is the open database, the open payments database that we talked about earlier. This is the pharmaceutical companies reporting to the federal government the money that they're spending, they're paying to our physicians. This is it's a huge amount of data that's out there that we have been using to see if our researchers are complying with their reporting criteria, what they need to report to. But this is also a very good tool for you as individuals to have the most amount of information you possibly can when making decision about your healthcare. And there is also some additional information out there for you on our website, which is the coi.utah.edu. And we're also here if you have any questions about any potential conflicts of interest that you might have in research that you're working on, or more importantly, if you're working with an investigator who is conflicted and you have any questions or concerns, you can contact us at any time. And we can help you out with that. There are phone numbers on here as well. So that is about all for my specific presentation. I did get some questions before we started, so I was just going to go ahead and just answer those questions real quick. And then I'll open it up to you and see if there's any questions that you have. So the first question was with ongoing research, what can be done to resolve the problem? And really what that is just management. So at any time during an open clinical trial or an open research project, a non-human subjects research project, there are several points throughout the year that we're reviewing the research. So if it's a human subjects research, any amendment that's made to that, so any change that they're making, we review them at that point to make sure that they don't have any conflicts of interest. And any time that there's a yearly continuing review, so the IRB goes back in and checks every year to make sure that the research is being done correctly. At all of these points, so submission, amendment, and continuing review, we're going through and making sure that there's no new additions to the financial interest of the investigators in that study. And if they are, we're managing them, or we're asking them to remove themselves from the study. So it's an ongoing, alive system that we're making sure that at any moment during the research study that there's no new potential conflict of interest. And that also includes when an investigator changes their adds something new to their disclosure, that also triggers a review with us, so we're able to go in and look at them specifically at that moment when the individual has made that update. So there's this question that came up that I find very interesting, and that is, do conflicts of interest mainly stem from moral quandaries? So one thing that we want to make clear is that having a conflict is not necessarily a bad thing. We want to make sure that we are having these relationships with industry and with different entities around the world so that we're able to get the best products, and we're able to get the best research done with the highest amount of accuracy, which takes a lot of time and a lot of money. So we need to realize that, especially if it's a human subject study, statistically, we need to have a large group of people. So working with industry allows us to gain that group of people and get the best data that we can from them. The moral quandary does come in with the bias and the potential of someone to manipulate data. So our office and the policies of the university and then the federal policies are all designed to make sure that those are the potential of bias and the potential of manipulation are reduced as much as possible. So I guess the answer is there are moral quandaries there, but the entire purpose of the conflict of interest policy and department is to make sure that those have the least effect as possible. What impacts do conflict of interest have on research? We went over that a little bit. Another part of it that we didn't really talk about is the bureaucratic pressure that is placed on researchers themselves. There is the importance of making sure that bias is eliminated, but conflicts of interest policy can also have an effect on our researchers that they don't want to engage in research, or I'm sorry, they don't want to engage in industry research. When, like I said before, it's really important. So we do want to impress the fact that it's not restricted to have conflicts. You can have conflicts. Just let us know, so that we can make sure that those are managed properly and that everybody knows that they exist, and make sure that the bias is eliminated. This is an interesting one. So what constitutes a conflict of interest when working with family? So that's a really great question. The university policy identifies that an individual is required to report financial interests that could be related to their responsibilities at the university for themselves and their family members. But in this case, family members would be a spouse or a dependent child. So brothers and sisters and aunts and uncles, those don't count. It's only your spouse. And it is really important that we have that information, because sometimes you'll have a spouse that works for a pharmaceutical company that a investigator may be working on a research study. So it is, important that we have that information. Now, there's not conflict of interest policy doesn't cover hiring spouses, though. That would be a different HR would be over that in Office of General Counsel. So that's all of the questions that I had. I'm wondering if anybody has any questions, or if they've had any experiences where they think that they might have interacted with a conflicted investigator, or they had some kind of conflict of interest themselves. It's just kind of an open forum. So if anybody has any questions. And you can either type those in, or you can take yourself off mute. You can also contact me later if you don't want to ask the question in this group. Okay, so do COI need to be managed if researcher doesn't directly concern a study where the study of an individual is on the line? So I think what you mean is if someone isn't, so the reporting. So I'm not sure I quite understand, Britton. So you're asking if if a study doesn't have direct connection with a conflict or with a financial interest, we don't manage it. And if it's something that someone's has a interest, but it's not specific to their research, there are other mechanisms that we would if it's a scholarly or educational activity, meaning let's say that they have a book that they have published and they want to sell that to their students, that would come through as a potential conflict of interest. Does that answer your question? Is that what you're looking for?
Kind of, yeah. I was just kind of thinking, like a lot of the examples you mentioned were with like medical studies where individuals participating in a study could be affected by a conflict of interest if the researcher was motivated by some financial reason connected to like their funding source. I was just curious if like in some research where there is no study like of human subjects and the direct like safety of individuals isn't really affected by conflict of interest, like is that something that your office still manages?
Yes, yes, you're great. Thanks for explaining that to me. Yes, there are a lot of studies. Most of the research that's done through the university that comes through our office is through the health science campus, but there are also others that don't. We do a lot of research. We have a huge engineering group that does research. We also have some business from the stuff that comes through the business school, where, yeah, you're right. There's no human subjects, so that's not going to affect human subjects directly. But there is, the consumer in the future who would be maybe buying this product, or the individuals that are working on the study itself. We do end up managing those to make sure that the research comes out unbiased, and that nobody that's part of the research team or the community that's going to be buying these products or using the computer software that's created. We do manage those, yeah. Okay, so we have another question here of what happens when the principal investigator makes a discovery and then proceeds to make a startup from the discovery, let's say a biotech company. Could this incur COI policy so that the principal investigator can no longer pursue the research with the university? That's a great question. There are a lot of this does happen. This happens a lot because we have a big biomechanical group here at the university that is creating new products. Say, for instance, there is a lot of stuff done with the Department of Defense with mechanical arms and legs to replace arms and legs of individuals who lost those. There's a lot of startups that were coming out, and actually President Randall wants us to increase those. So this does happen a lot of the times, where an individual will create an intellectual property. That intellectual property will show efficacy in treatment, or it'll be useful. And because the university doesn't have the same mechanisms as industry does, they will create a startup company. And that startup company, will use that intellectual property. And generally, when that research will continue to be done at the University of Utah. There are specific grants that the federal government creates to help startups and to help companies with research for new studies, and it also partnering in partnership with universities. These are called SBIRs and STTRs. They're small business innovation research loans, or they're not loans, I apologize, grants. So this does happen a lot. And the answer to the question is maybe. They could potentially be asked to remove themselves from that research. Generally, what we would do in that case is we would probably have them designate a principal investigator who's not conflicted, so they themselves could continue to be part of the research, but not as the principal investigator. We would have a non-conflicted member. This also has implications for institutional conflicts of interest, because the intellectual property, if it's created at the University of Utah, is partially owned by the University of Utah. So we have a conflict itself. So there would also be a management plan created for the institution. And it is, depending on what the product is, what the startup is, who the investigator is, there is a potential for us to require protections that may not be normally included in research like this, which could include a data safety monitoring board that is external to the University of Utah. This would be a group of people who are experts in the field that come together to look at the data, to make sure that the data is coming out that makes sense and meets the outcomes that the research team is reporting. But yeah, that's a great question. It really depends on the specifics of the study. They could be allowed to continue on. This happens monthly. We have these kind of reviews that come through. So great question. Okay. Does anyone else have any other questions? Is there anything else that we can go over? Is there anything else that you would like us to go over again? Maybe you didn't have, maybe you didn't understand something that I was talking about. I did throw around a lot of acronyms. So. Okay, great. Well, if anybody has any questions in the future, feel free to reach out to our department. I'm always around and ready to talk. It's real great to spend this time with you guys today, and great questions. The questions today were just great, and I hope this helped you out.
Thank you so much, Bryant, for that. I actually had a very quick question.
Yeah.
Just because research looks differently kind of across colleges and across disciplines. For example, research in humanities or social and behavioral science, maybe that type of research is more community outreach, community engagement. And oftentimes the communities we're working with are, you know, ethnic, racial minorities, or historically marginalized groups.
Yes.
How would your office be of a resource for students doing research in that area? For example, maybe their research is a questionnaire that they send out to people and they have them answer. Would there be involvement from your office to support that? What would be steps that students could take to be proactive in ensuring there is no conflict of interest and they are doing this, you know, ethically?
Yeah, great question. Well, so the first thing would be we would have a disclosure, right? So if the individual has some kind of financial interest external to the University of Utah, we would require them to disclose that. So that would be something we would work with them on a management plan for. Yeah, we are if there's no financial interest that's directly related, we wouldn't even review the study. It wouldn't be something that we would need that we would require to be reviewed. However, at any time, if you have any questions, if you are filling out an IRB and you have a question about, oh, maybe there's a conflict here that I didn't realize, you can absolutely contact us, and we can consult with you to make sure that we go over all the information that you provide and make sure that we don't see any conflicts of interest. And if we do, we can help you with the institutional review board or with your the researchers that you're working with. We can help you maybe design your study so that the bias and the conflict is reduced as much as possible. Yeah, and the importance of EDI, DEI, I can never remember which one it is. The diversity, equity, and inclusion is really important to all of us here at the University of Utah, and our committee itself is actually made up from a wide variety of people from a bunch of different departments at the university and backgrounds. So we would like to, we like to help out all we can with EDI. So
perfect. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah.
Really in-depth presentation. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with our students. Just as a reminder to everyone, please fill out the eval form, particularly if you are a UROP scholar. If you would like to receive credit for attending this event, please do not forget to fill that out. Students, we are here to offer support as well for this. If you have any questions or want a follow-up with the office of, or conflict of interest office, don't be afraid to reach out to us or Bryant specifically. We are, like I said, we're here to help. Thank you so much.